Welcome to the Play-Based Learning Podcast. I'm your host, Kristen R.B. Peterson, and maybe your new teacher bestie that is here to hype you up, maybe give you a motivating kick in the pants, and teach you all I know about play and childhood. I am here to help you challenge old and outdated practices and inspire you to create a truly developmentally appropriate early childhood environment that fosters creativity, curiosity, and joy in the children that you care for. Let's set the stage for a lifelong love of learning. Let's get going. Kristy DeGraaf is joining me on the podcast today. Hello, Kristy.
Hi.
And we are chatting about advocacy for early childhood education. And I think a lot of times the word advocate or advocacy scares people because they think they need to march up to a Capitol and stand outside of it and stand in front of people in like a government type place. But explain to us what you think advocacy is and what that means to you.
Yeah. So, let me start here because I am a family childcare provider.
Yeah.
And I think anyone in the early childhood field understands it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
And your brain is sort of constantly solving problems, emotionally regulating, we're just constantly on overdrive. And so the idea of adding anything else can feel really, really overwhelming. And so when I started in family childcare 16 years ago, actually, I remember we would get notifications of the rule changes or the meetings where they were making the rules or any of that. And I would just be they would go in the trash because I could not handle one more thing. I was just tell me what I need to do and I will do it.
Yes.
And so the idea of advocating for myself felt impossible because I felt like I was just trying to constantly keep from drowning. Right.
Yeah.
But the longer that I was in the field, the more that I realized that if you just continue to do that, you're going to be pulled every which way, and you're going to be at the mercy of people who are not working with kids.
Yes.
For the most part, or maybe have never even worked with kids.
It's so wild. That's so wild. Bananas.
Right? And people are making these policies and they're making these rules with really without any context. And so, just kind of little things started to happen over the years that made me recognize how important it is to actually be as involved as you can.
Yeah.
Now, that's going to look different for everybody. But for me, it started actually sort of accidentally because I started my program, I moved, and then we had this house that we rented out for a while. And then my sister-in-law moved into it. And so when she moved into it, I had to go back to the city and do all of the things to get the program started. And so I went back to the city enough times that I kind of started to see patterns and problems with that process for providers, because I'd been a couple times for myself, then for her. And when she moved, so she moved out of that house, started her own program. We went to the city like we always did, and there was always the parking stuff that was obnoxious and everything. But we showed up and she had probably a half a dozen neighbors there, kind of protesting her opening this program. Oh, right?
My gosh.
You would not believe, it was my dog has anxiety. He's going to be so upset with all of these kids outside playing all the time. What about the traffic? What kind of people is this going to be bringing into my neighborhood?
Oh my gosh.
Right. All of these sort of ridiculous concerns that people had. But I had been back enough to know this was not exclusive to her. Right. Yeah. So that was kind of my first opportunity to stand up in front of the, City Board of Adjustments and say, here is why this is important. here is, you have somebody who has a master's in early childhood education that wants to open a high quality program.
Yeah.
And kind of trying to like educate them on the power of early childhood and the need for our community. So that's where it started for me.
Okay. So now what does advocacy look like for you?
Well, so it kind of has morphed from there. And I will say I like speaking in front of people. So there's that. And I always preface this conversation with, it does not have to look the same for you as it looks for me.
Right.
But what really kind of threw me into it more was a couple of years ago, I actually was moving out of family childcare, I thought. I was the director of a larger center here in town. I had opened this center for the university. I was planning to move to that full time and close my family childcare program, but I got wind of a bill that was coming up that was going to change the regulations and allow unlicensed providers to have more children.
Oh.
Now, people have a lot of different feelings about that, and that's okay. Like, not everybody has to agree with me on that, but I did not feel like that was a good idea, right? I felt like it was bad for kids. I felt like it was especially bad for low income kids who were going to then have less access to high quality licensed programs. Right?
Yeah.
So I found somebody at the university who I knew was doing legislative work, and I said, what do I need to do? Because I forgot, several years ago, I had once dipped my toe into this world, and I'd heard about this bill, and I had a friend who was a senator. And so I emailed him and I said, hey, this is a terrible idea. This isn't fair. It shouldn't pass. And he's like, well, thanks for your input, but it's already basically done. Right. Because I didn't understand the legislative process.
Yeah.
So I talked to her. I said, what do we need to do? She gave me a short list of, well, you've got to kill it in committee before it gets on the train to being passed. And so I just I figured out how that worked. I figured out, she showed me where to go to get to the Zoom links and to get to the legislative committees. And I went and I testified. And I'm just over here. I'm just an early childhood person, trying to run a program for kids. But I was able to say, this is why this issue is so vital. And I was able to speak to that. Little did I know, it wasn't just me. There was several other people there. And by stepping into that space, I was able to get connected with a whole group of people that have now organized this whole effort. We have actually now here called Care for Kids.
Okay.
It's organized by this nonprofit organization called Voices for Utah Children. And they've been working for Utah's kids for a long time, but they work on education and elementary and, stuff for older kids. But because I showed up and stepped into this space and was so passionate, they have now kind of built this network around early childhood, early care and education. And they have this whole arm of their organization that is working on these different issues for kids. And it's incredible to see what we've been able to accomplish with just pieces and just people showing up when they can.
Absolutely. Okay. So what are some of the biggest challenges that you've come across when when practicing advocacy for early childhood?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of things. Number one, you have to figure out how to show up, right? Because it's a little bit different than just hanging out with your buddies and complaining about all the things that are wrong and all the things that need to happen.
We love to do that though.
We do. But that actually, we'll come back to that because that's kind of a trick and a suggestion that I have for people. But I remember the first meeting that I showed up in, I said some things in a way that that was hard for the legislators to hear. And they didn't want to, I said sometimes it feels like we're auctioning Utah's kids off to the lowest bidder. That did not go off. That did not go over well.
No. Okay.
Right. So,
Yep.
you show up, you say things wrong.
Yep.
And you still show up, and you still I learned from that. I learned how to be a little bit more diplomatic with the words that I was saying. And my choice of words. So that's a challenge, is you have to learn how to speak to people who have a completely different perspective than you.
Okay.
Right? Because her response, the one legislator's response was, well, I have a baby and I personally interviewed over 20 people to be the nanny for my child. Right? She just didn't have any clue of the struggle that a lot of parents face when trying to consider, like, can I afford quality care for my child?
Right.
Or do I put food on the table?
Yeah.
So, that was not even in her brain. And so to put it that way was not helpful for her. It kind of put her on the defense.
I read something the other day that when there is somebody whose opinion differs than yours, and I actually put it in my notes on my phone, I just pulled it up. Something that you can say to that person is, tell me why your belief around this topic will create a more beautiful world if we adopted your perspective. And I love that, because you can use it in any way, shape, or form. And it really gets them to think, well, is this perspective making a more beautiful world? Yeah. Not. And you could change that up a little bit, like a more beautiful world for children, or a more inclusive world for children, or a more learning rich world for children, or whatever it is. But tell me why your belief around this topic will create a more beautiful world if we adopted your perspective. Thought that was really cool.
Yeah. And what I like about that is it is easy to feel in this work that you are not getting anything done, that nobody understands the importance of what you're doing, that nobody understands your perspective. And sometimes, frankly, it feels like people don't care, right? Yeah. Like the way that they talk about kids. But if you can, even if you don't get the chance to ask that question directly, if you can think about and understand their perspective and understand, like, okay, so this particular legislator obviously has a different experience, but clearly she cares deeply about her child, and she most likely cares about all of the children in Utah in the way that she understands best, right? And so we can start there with that. People want to do good and figure out what we can do from there.
Absolutely. Okay.
So, yeah.
Tell me about community involvement in supporting the needs of early childhood education. What do you have any, so you talked about the one initiative in Utah. Do you know of any others that have been very successful in advocating for early care and education?
Well, it's always going to be a community effort, right? Okay. But from that experience, it was actually really kind of cool what happened. So we were able to defeat that bill.
Oh, but good.
Yeah, which was cool, but it doesn't end there.
Oh, okay.
But the sponsor of the bill really wanted to do something for early childhood. And this is important too, I think, for the podcast listeners to understand, because if you start to pay attention, it is actually a really incredible time to get involved in advocacy, and a really incredible time to be talking about this, because of COVID. Yeah, it's a huge topic of interest for people, because, as you and I know, the system has been kind of broken for a while. Yeah. But people are now just seeing that. And so there are a lot of conversations happening in all places. So this legislator wanted to do something. And so we went away from defeating that bill with committed to moving forward on something, right? Mm-hmm. So she spent that summer doing some listening sessions, which I attended. and working with, however they do that to craft that bill. But in the meantime, I actually sat down and I took that list of things that we always complain about, right?
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, okay, if I was a legislator working at the state of Utah, is there anything I could do about these things? And I listed about 5 things that I was like, you could look at this issue. You could look at this issue. You could look at this.
What were some of the things? Do you remember?
Yeah. So one of them was that insurance is really challenging for family childcare providers. I know family childcare providers who have had the same insurance company for 20 years, and then they have a claim, and then the insurance company is like, oh, we didn't know you had a family childcare, and they kick them off, right?
Oh my gosh.
Or like there's companies that like will not insure family childcare providers. And to me, that just like seems wrong.
Yeah.
So I was like, can you make some legislation around that? Like that you cannot exclude somebody simply because they have a family childcare program.
Yeah.
So that was one. Insurance for childcare providers, right? I was like, is there any way that childcare providers can buy into the state retirement benefits package and the insurance package? The city regulations is one, because, like in our city, we have the, at least in our state, we have the state regulations, but then every city has additional regulations on top of that. So like here in the state regulations say you have to have a 4-foot fence, but our city regulations say you have to have 6-foot fence.
Oh my gosh.
Right. Like, so it's just like these things that pile on top of each other that make it more challenging for people. And
absolutely,
frankly, I have seen more than one person who wanted to open an early childhood program here, and they got like mostly through the process, and then they got to the city, and those final like additional things that they had to do were just the nail in the coffin, and they didn't do it.
Oh my gosh.
So, so that was one. And then the other one was in Utah, we can have 16 kids with 2 childcare providers with a licensed family childcare program. But if you have mixed ages and you have families with older kids, there was always this complicating factor where kids would come home after school, and if enough kids hadn't left, you were out of ratio, or you had to save their spots for a part-time rate or whatever. So those were some of the things. But what ended up happening is they ended up taking 2 of those. They ended up taking the school age kids and the city regulations and putting them in a bill that we ultimately ended up getting passed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That's amazing.
Yeah. And it was really cool. And here's the thing, like the school age thing it's been sort of a mixed bag for me, right? Because I was like, yes, this is going to be amazing. We're going to be able to have these extra kids. And, it's now I'm like, do I even want more school age kids? Right? Like 19 kids, because we could have 3 extra school age kids now.
Okay.
So 19 kids though, that's a lot. And
that's
I'm like,
a lot.
So that maybe didn't solve the problem the way I wanted it to. But the cool thing is that we actually made a difference. We actually changed the law in Utah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Way to go.
So, and it wasn't just me, like I said, it was like this whole initiative around, this group and other family childcare providers coming together, and, this group kind of helping us like, okay, let's start a letter writing campaign on this, and let's reach out to our legislators on this, and we need to call on this. So, it's been a really cool experience to be involved. But the other thing that I've learned is that sometimes, number one, things take time, and you have to, like, sometimes you have to give up stuff. The unlicensed, the raise in the unlicensed kids came back in that bill. I was so frustrated about it, but that was included as well. But it was like, this process of give and take. And
oh my gosh. So, well, I mean, you made a difference for sure. That's amazing.
Yeah. And we're continuing. And that's the thing. Is we're kind of trying to snowball this, and we're continuing to try to make a difference. And I mean, even like this week, there's a bill in front of, this is a federal bill, but regarding the food program. And so I put that up on the Facebook page and everybody's excited about it. And I'm like, you know what? We might actually be able to get people calling our legislators and our senators and making some progress on this. And this is a bill. I mean, it spends money, right? Because, you know, it's food programs, so it increases funding.
Yeah.
It's not something our senators would probably normally vote for. They're, you know, we're in Utah, very conservative.
Yeah.
Like, but if we can get 100 childcare providers to call their office,
yeah,
you know,
they're going to listen, maybe.
They may consider voting for it.
Interesting. That is so neat. One of the things that I know was done in Minnesota at one point in time for childcare providers, which was trying to get heard. There was an initiative where there was some sort of bill they were trying to get passed, and a whole bunch of childcare providers across the whole entire state all sent in diapers, like a diaper with a note written on it, like, please support blah, 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 bill, whatever it was. And they sent diapers to their
that's incredible,
like, representatives so that they would like notice what was going on. It was really cool. Mm-hmm.
I love that. I'm actually going to tell them about that.
Yes, absolutely. So, okay. So advocacy for you on a big scale looks like doing things with the legislature and getting bills passed and stuff. What does advocacy look like for you on a small scale?
And that's an excellent question because, like I said, bandwidth, right?
Yeah,
like, a lot of us don't have a lot of the bandwidth to do big things. For me, it looks like posting on social media, right? Like, it looks like noticing, and I intentionally try to follow places where I know those stories are going to come up. When I see a story come across my feed, I follow like the food program site, so that those will come across my feed more often. So maybe posting my own notes. I mean, you know, I do social media, so sometimes I do stuff in my social media, and that's a lot of fun for me. But you don't have to show your face on video, right? Sometimes it looks for me like having conversations with other women at church about, you know, when they find out what I do, and just talking about, you know, like how challenging it is to be a young mom, and trying to understand their perspective and letting them know, you know, the work that I do and how important it is, and giving them a little bit of my perspective as a childcare provider. And the cool thing is we have a lot of this language right now with the childcare cliff. You know, a lot of the language that's in the media that we can actually say, this is my experience. And I've had more than one person say, wow, I didn't realize like that was a thing. I didn't realize how hard you work. I didn't think about the fact that, you know, not everybody has choices for good childcare, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it can be a letter to your senator, right? I've heard, and I don't know if this is true, but I've heard like if a representative at the state level, at least in Utah, gets like half a dozen emails on something, they think it's a hot topic.
Oh, really?
Right? Yeah, because people are just not involved.
They aren't. You're right.
Right. And so it's challenging, but it's so easy now with, you know, like if you go to this issue with the food program thing, if you find the website, there's actually like a button you can just click, and you can right away look up your representatives. They will give you a form email. You can send the form email. So at least, you know, like at a minimum, you're saying this is an issue I care about. I'm your constituent, you know. Or you can also usually personalize those and put a little bit of your own story in there, which is ideal if you take the 5 minutes to do that.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So in Minnesota, there is, and this might be US wide, I'm not sure, but there's an organization called Think Small. Mm-hmm. And they actually have a program that Minnesota early childhood educators, childcare providers can apply for. And they actually teach you all about advocacy and how to make change and how to like get involved in bill writing and like all of that kind of stuff. Is really amazing. And I actually took it right before COVID. And so it shut down and we didn't get to finish. But there might be things like that in other states. So look into it. Cause I know Think Small is an organization that's nationwide, I believe. And our Minnesota sect has that program. So yeah, something
That's one of my biggest
out.
pieces of advice to people is to get involved with a group of people who's already doing this work, because it's so challenging. It's so daunting to do. And there's even like with everything that I do, there are still things when they're like, we're going to do this letter writing campaign. Can you do this? And I do what I can, but it's never as much as I want to.
Yeah.
But knowing that I'm a part of a bigger group, it doesn't feel like I have to do it all myself. And I think initially, when I was like a younger worker, a younger employee, I didn't necessarily see the value of being involved in, like, because I started my career with the state. So I didn't see the value of being involved with the state employee union or whatever it was. Right. And then when I started in family childcare, NAFCC, the local one, I was kind of like, I don't know, like, I don't agree with them on everything. And that's usually what it is. I don't agree with everything that they're doing, which is fine. Like, you're never going to get a group of, thousands of people to all agree. But what I found is that number one, if you don't like what they're doing, you can get more involved. And in a lot of these organizations, you can actually make a difference. Yes. Right? You can bring a different perspective and help change the narrative. But number two, that is the best way. Like, NAFCC is probably one of the best ways for family childcare providers to be involved in an organization that is speaking at a national level. Most of us are not going to get the chance to go to DC and to testify in front of, Congress. And most of us don't want to, right?
Right, exactly. I don't know if I'd want to.
But they're there and they're doing that. And as much as you can be involved, it helps move the conversation forward. And if I've learned anything through this process, especially like, with this last bill that we got, you can make a difference. I mean, I suggested something that is now Utah law.
That's amazing.
And I'm just a family childcare provider here in my little town of, 40,000 people.
Yes.
In southern Utah, which isn't even, like, it's like the forgotten part of Utah. Right? Like, there's Salt Lake, and then there's the stepchild down here.
It's kind of true, actually.
Yeah, you've been here.
I know.
Right? So, but we can make a difference, and you don't have to pass laws, and you don't have to come up with all the ideas. But if you can take those things that are most frustrating to you, start paying attention to them, start being in the rooms, right? Like, I kind of, quote Hamilton, right? Be in the room where it happens.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
Get involved with your provider groups. I mean, there's been more than once with my Facebook provider group that I wanted to just walk away because the drama was like,
oh yeah.
But, like, by staying there and being there, I've been able to help kind of shift some of the focus sometimes, right? And move this frustrated energy to an energy that is actually making change and actually moving conversations forward. So
amazing. Well, the work that you're doing is amazing. You are brave, you are smart, you are brilliant. So like,
you're so kind.
It's amazing what you've been able to do. And you say just a family childcare provider, but like, you are a family childcare provider, no just. So
yes, that's true.
There you go. Tell people where they can find out more about you and connect with you if they have questions or want help figuring out how they can get involved in any sort of advocacy in their area of the world.
Yes. So I am most active on Instagram at Kristy, KRISTY.DeGraaf, DEGRAAF, 2 A's, 1 F. So you can find me there. I'm on Facebook and TikTok as well. You can also find me on my website, KristyDeGraaf.com.
Amazing.
Recently up and going. So, and you can sign up for my newsletter there. I send out just little things there as far as what you can do to help improve your program, advocacy stuff, outdoor classroom stuff. I talk about a lot of that. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Awesome. We'll put all those links down below so that people can, or in the show notes, so that people can connect with you. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for being an advocate for children. I appreciate the work you're doing.
Thanks so much, Kristen. Thanks for having me.
Of course. If you liked what you heard today, share this podcast with your coworkers, admin, or maybe even your partner. And I love getting 5-star reviews so more people can embrace play. Hit follow or subscribe so you never miss an episode. Or connect with me on Instagram or my website, KristenRBPeterson.com. Until next time.